Welcome to session 1. What is mindfulness? So we're going to start this whole course off with what is mindfulness, understanding what it is, what it's not, what will practice look like, and how important is practicing. So I'm going to use the definition of John Kabat-Zinn, someone who's very big in the mindfulness space and teaching, that mindfulness is the awareness that arises from paying attention in a particular way. And that way is moment by moment and, very important, non-judgmentally. So what we're going to be doing with mindfulness is trying to cultivate curious attention to the present moment that we're in and really grow our ability to be present and to catch ourselves when we're not being so. Because often we really live most of our lives on autopilot. We're either rehashing the past, worrying about something, getting caught up in that, or we're often rehearsing the future. What's to come? What are we worried about that's to come? You name it. And often it really feels like the moment that we're actually in isn't really that important to pay attention to. And because we're so busy being distracted in the future or the past, we really miss a lot of detail about the experience that we're actually having. And we really discount a lot of the meaning and value of that experience. And we often don't have actually the data of what's going on to be able to act in a way that is appropriate to that situation. We're usually so influenced by where our mind actually is that it's not always optimal the way we're actually engaging with this moment. Mindfulness is really the process of observing our mind and our body intentionally. We're trying to let our experience unfold moment by moment and find ways to really accept them as they are. We're not trying to reject thoughts, suppress them. We're not trying to regulate anything at all. We're just trying to focus our attention. So the practice of mindfulness is an ability or skill that we can grow through practice, just like any other skill or ability. You can think of it like a muscle. Every time we catch our mind wandering, we're going to bring it back to something in the present moment. So the first piece of mindfulness is being aware of when your mind has even wandered, growing our muscle of noting that, and then being able to redirect that attention to something in the present moment, something that's salient like the breath or the body. And we'll talk about those things that can anchor you to the present. And every time your mind wanders and you bring it back to the present moment, that is a moment of mindfulness. It's kind of like a bicep curl for your brain. We're building new pathways in our brains and new abilities to be okay with what's going on in that moment and aware of it. And then have the ability really to respond in appropriate ways. And it's also important to highlight, as I did in the first slide, that whenever we notice ourselves wandering and we bring our attention back to the present moment, we want to do so without judgment. So without judging the thoughts that we're having or the fact that our mind has wandered, and then letting that judgment take us off into a very unhelpful direction. So being able to note when our mind has wandered, bring it back with awareness and kindness, and being able to really be with what is actually happening for us in that moment without judging the fact that we've wandered off or whatever thoughts had brought us off in the first place. You can think of maybe an example of how you've caught yourself thinking something or doing something and then become so frustrated by it or whatever you judge about that behavior that you become distracted, paralyzed, you name it, and you can't even engage in that situation at all at that moment. So our judgments are really powerful. So in this course, we'll really be focusing on shifting from doing to being mode, which I think can be difficult in the contemporary world that we're in. We really want to talk about slowing down and fostering calmness and self-acceptance. And all this by learning how to observe what your mind is doing from moment to moment without getting caught up in it. To be able to look at what's happening, look at old problems in a new way. And maybe something that we're going to focus on a lot is noticing how interconnected we are with the world, with our bodies, with other people. And so we'll be shifting from doing to being mode, and then also reorienting ourselves, inviting ourselves to be more familiar with our bodies, our mind, and our life, to be in connection in more aware and helpful and connected ways. You know, from my point of view, as long as you're breathing, there is more right with you than wrong with you, no matter what you're dealing with. And so we're really going to use our attention in these next few sessions to look at what is working with us and what is actually going on. What are the things we're not noticing, and how can that be helpful? You know, and then awareness. With all that, we're really cultivating awareness. We want to note these important dimensions of our lives that we haven't noticed or that we've ignored, and see how they could actually be helpful for us. And then adaptation. We want to establish a new way of being in relationship to things as they are, not trying to force it to be as it's not, and see what happens when we can kind of accept the reality of things and work with them. And so from week to week, there's going to be a new, or session to session, whatever way you're watching these videos, there'll be a new theme that we can connect to mindfulness. And then we're going to have a new practice, a weekly mindfulness practice, something that I encourage you to try a week practicing just the thing we touch on. So, for example, this week it'll be a body scan. Next session it'll be focusing on mindfulness of breath, and so on. And so each session will take a concept of mindfulness, discuss it, and then I'll expose you to a new way of practicing. And over time, hopefully these give you information of different ways to practice, and you can start to see what you gravitate towards and start to really craft and individualize mindfulness practice. So we've talked a bit about what mindfulness is. I always find it very important to highlight what mindfulness is not, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions about what mindfulness actually is. So first of all, it's not about clearing your mind of thought. You know, mindfulness, you can't force your mind not to wander, and it's not about that. It's about noticing when it has and redirecting your attention and reconnecting with what's most important in that moment. Mindfulness is also not a relaxation exercise. Sometimes mindfulness meditation can be deeply relaxing, and you'll experience moments of calm and ease while meditating, but that's not the goal. Sometimes you're going to meditate and not feel relaxed at all, and you can't force yourself to be relaxed. The goal is really just to be present with what's already here, and if possible, to hold it with kindness. And really the goal is to let go of having any goal. Next, mindfulness is not a quick fix. You know, sometimes we can feel really at home right away when we practice, but it's important to keep in mind there'll be other times when you practice and it won't feel as comfortable. You might feel anxious, you might feel bored. This is a process that unfolds over time, and establishing a practice that really makes sense and fits you takes time as well. And you really have to give it a chance before you start seeing aspects of mindfulness show up for you in your life outside of practice. And then lastly, mindfulness is not a technique. It becomes a way of life. It's a particular lens through which you see what's happening in your world. It's a way of being instead of doing. It's a way that you can kind of see what's happening, be aware, and choose to be in relationship to it in a much more helpful or wiser way. Things like relaxation and healing those emerge all by themselves when mindfulness is engaged in a wholehearted way, and when it becomes kind of a way of being, in a way that you engage and interact with the world and yourself. The 2 ways to practice mindfulness and to grow your ability to be mindful: formal meditation, formal practice. So that's, for example, what's going to be at the end of each session. Sitting informally practicing with a sampling of guided meditations. And so this is a great way to really make yourself disciplined to sit each day for a certain amount of time, going through a formal meditation practice in which you get an opportunity to catch your mind wandering and bring it back as many times as you need to. And then there's also informal practice, and that is being mindful while engaging in everyday activities, whether it's doing the laundry, washing your hands, brushing your teeth, eating something, and you're observing your experience in that moment. You're being very present and being aware of, what does this feel like? What do I hearing? What is the texture? What is the smell? Anything like that. And when you notice your mind taking you somewhere else, bring yourself back in a very aware, focused way onto that task itself and the details of it that you're observing. And so both of these ways of practicing are important, and they support and strengthen each other. I'm really hoping with these sessions that it can help contribute to personalizing this practice to you, so that you can start really personalizing strategies for working with issues in your life. And in this, you can really start contributing to your own health and healing. And in order to do this, and to hopefully, in so doing, expand your relationship with yourself, with your world, with others, you really need to practice. That's something I really want to emphasize. Time in your day to practice is not going to just emerge magically all by itself. You really have to rearrange your schedule and prioritize it and plan for it. You have to make time to practice every day, because you're not going to find this time. And even though meditation and mindfulness is really about being instead of doing, there might have to be a bit of active doing in setting up a time for you to be able to train, if you will, kind of like an athlete. If you want to see results, you have to practice. And if you don't practice and you come back to these sessions, you might ultimately find yourself not connecting as well with the content, because words are lacking. As much as it's helpful to describe the experience and what you're trying to do, if you're not living the experience, it becomes a little bit more difficult to really connect these concepts, because they're ones that you really kind of have to experience. So not that it can't be helpful to learn the content and let the mindfulness practice form in time. You will get a lot more out of it if you can be disciplined and make a priority to practice. And then I just want to highlight that with all this practice, really trust your own experience, the fact that you're an expert of your own experience, and knowing that meditating and mindfulness practice, it can sometimes bring up emotions, you name it, things that were maybe there that you haven't been paying as much attention to, and now you're pouring attention into them. And so it can be a little overwhelming at times, and you really have to trust yourself to know when you need to lean out and when you can lean in and be a little bit uncomfortable, and knowing that leaning in is not always the answer. And lastly, I just want to highlight the concept of neuroplasticity, because this is really what inspired me to make a course like this. The fact that our brains have the capacity to adapt and change, both in structure and function, in response to novel experiences we have, to thoughts we have, to things like mindfulness, therapy, and things like that. We can actually change our brain structure. And previously in medicine and science, it was thought that our brains were fixed and unchanging, and that we actually just lost function as we got older. But this has really been overturned more recently. And so it's now really understood that our brains are ever changing. And so it's important to understand that through mindfulness, we can really observe our habits, our thoughts, our automatic responses, and choose to operate differently, to challenge those thoughts, to move ourselves away from those reactions. And in so doing, change these neuronal patterns that we have in our minds, to change the way our mind fires in automatic reaction to things. And when we train ourselves in mindfulness, we're actually doing that. Every time we start practicing catching our mind wandering and bringing it back to the breath, to the body, to whatever's in the present moment for us, we're changing the way our brain fires. We're letting it practice firing that way, that when our mind wanders, it brings it back. And this is why it takes a lot of focused effort. When you already have other patterns that are very automatic in your brain, you can think of it as very well-worn trenches that wheels have gone over and over and fired and fired. So trying to make new habits of mind takes really focused effort and practice. And the idea is that over time, the more your brain fires this new way, the more those become more well-worn and more automatic for us as well. So for this session, I'm going to lead us through a meditation called a body scan. And basically what you'll be doing is paying attention to all different areas of your body one by one, ending with opening your awareness to the entire body. And I do this because your body's always with you. It's something that's very tangible. You can feel into it in the moment, and you can be aware that that is something that's actually happening in that moment. And also, mindfulness practice is not just an intellectual exercise. It's about deepening our mind-body connection, especially in this course. My aim is for you to start becoming reacquainted with your body and with physical sensations as they're experienced. What goes on in the brain has an influence on your body and vice versa, because the mind is the body, and that's something I'll really be emphasizing over and over in this course. Even though the mind is the body, a lot of us have found a way to be so disconnected from what our body feels like that we can't really detect sensations or emotions in the body. And this can be especially the case when a person's living with a chronic medical condition. So the body scan can really be an important way for us to open up more dialogue and information about pathways of healing with our body by really understanding it more and being open to it. So we're going to scan through different parts of our body and just observe those sensations, and then also practice letting go or tolerating them, or just accepting whatever's there for us in the moment. We might note that we want to linger longer in more comfortable places, but we move on. We might find that we want to really leave an area of tension or pain, but we stay, or we repeatedly come back to it. We're not asking for anything from our body. It's just more about receiving sensations from the body. And not judging anything as bad or good, just being. And so I just want to emphasize that sometimes this is difficult for people at the beginning, and I can encourage you to try it anyways. And you can just note that when people regularly practice a body scan, they really come to notice the nuance of their bodies. And they notice that it's really, our body are often feel different every time we do a body scan. And this can be a helpful way for us to start reconnecting our conscious mind to the feeling states of our body. So give it a try.